January 4th, 2023 was supposed to be like any other day in Enoch, Utah. But behind the closed doors of the Haight family home, a quiet, deadly storm was unfolding. When authorities arrived for a welfare check, they discovered a scene that would haunt the community forever. 8 lives taken in cold blood. The killer, Michael Haight, a seemingly ordinary father and husband who had been living a life of hidden abuse and control. 2 weeks earlier, his wife, Tausha, had filed for divorce. But no one could have predicted how far Michael would go to regain his grip on power. What drove him to end the lives of those he vowed to protect? The shocking truth might just leave you speechless. On the surface, the Haight family appeared to embody the quiet, picturesque life of a suburban family in Enoch, Utah. Michael Haight, 42, was a father of 5, seemingly devoted to his wife, Tausha, and their children, 2 girls and 3 boys, ranging in age from 4 to 17. The family was well known in the community, active in local church activities, and involved in their children's school life. Michael, an insurance agent, was often seen as a dedicated husband and father, always doing what was expected of him in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Tausha, 40, was equally well regarded, a loving, energetic mother who worked hard to care for her family and make sure her children thrived. She often smiled in public, a pillar of warmth and kindness, fully committed to raising her children. But behind the front door of their seemingly perfect home, things were far from idyllic. There were cracks in the foundation that over time grew impossible to ignore. The Haight's life wasn't as it seemed. Underneath the image of a perfect family lay a dark and painful truth, one that would only come to light in the aftermath of a horrific tragedy. At the center of this complex web was Michael Haight, who, by all accounts, seemed like an ordinary man, outwardly friendly, dependable, and respectable. He portrayed himself as a devoted father and loving husband, taking his family to church every Sunday and participating in local events. But those close to the family knew there was something more, something hidden beneath the surface that Michael worked tirelessly to keep from view. His tendency to control those around him, especially Tausha, had been a growing issue, one that would only escalate as the years passed. Michael Haight had perfected the art of appearances. On the surface, he was a devoted father, a loving husband, and a well-respected member of the Enoch community. He attended church regularly, was involved in local events, and had a family that seemed to fit the ideal mold of suburban perfection. With his picture-perfect family, he seemed to embody the values of a hard-working, caring man. But behind closed doors, the reality was something far darker. It wasn't long before cracks started to appear in Michael's facade. In 2020, Michael's eldest daughter, Macy, reached out to authorities with a shocking accusation. Her father had been abusing her. She described incidents of physical and emotional abuse that had been happening for years. Macy was brave enough to speak up, but Michael's carefully crafted image as a loving father made it difficult for anyone to take her accusations seriously. Police investigated the claims, but no charges were filed. The family remained intact, on the surface at least. But the emotional scars that Michael's behavior left on his children were profound, especially for Macy, who bore the brunt of his anger. Despite the investigation, Michael seemed to have an unshakable grip on his family. His charm and seemingly sincere demeanor allowed him to maintain his public image while privately controlling every aspect of his home life. His relationship with Tausha, his wife, had long been strained, but they kept up the illusion of normalcy. Michael's need to dominate every situation, every person in his life, was becoming more apparent. He had always kept Tausha on a short leash, emotionally manipulating her, isolating her from others, and making her feel as though she had no choice but to remain in a suffocating marriage. Tausha, for her part, had put up with the abuse for years. She was a woman who had, in many ways, surrendered her own identity for the sake of her children. She knew the danger of speaking out, of defying Michael, and had become used to walking on eggshells. But the years of emotional neglect, control, and psychological manipulation took a toll. Tausha grew tired of pretending that everything was fine, and her realization that she needed to make a change came slowly but surely. By the end of 2022, after years of living under Michael's reign of control, Tausha made a decision that would set the stage for the unimaginable tragedy that would unfold just weeks later. On December 2022, she filed for divorce. Her decision to leave Michael was a courageous step, one that many of her friends and family supported, despite knowing the risks it might carry. But Michael's response to Tauscha's decision wasn't one of sorrow or understanding. It was one of deep anger, resentment, and a fierce desire to reclaim control. For him, losing Tauscha and his children wasn't an option. His need to dominate had reached its breaking point. In the days that followed Tauscha's divorce filing, Michael's demeanor became increasingly erratic. He started showing up at the family home uninvited, demanding that his children remain loyal to him, trying to convince them that their mother was the source of all the problems. His sense of powerlessness turned into fury. Despite Tauscha's request to stay apart and have space during the divorce process, Michael made it clear that he wasn't ready to let go. His obsessive need for control was palpable, and it was only a matter of time before something snapped. In the midst of this growing tension, Michael took what appeared to be a precautionary step, removing all the firearms from the house. This move, perhaps intended to ease his wife's concerns, was misleading. Tauscha had believed this action would keep the family safe, as Michael had previously been known to own several guns. She trusted that the weapons were no longer a threat, but in reality, this was part of a much deeper, darker shift in Michael's mindset. What no one could have known at the time was that Michael had spent the days leading up to the tragedy preparing in secret. Reports would later reveal that he had spent hours online researching gunshot noises and other related topics, an unsettling sign of his growing fixation on the unimaginable act he was about to carry out. The carefully calculated decisions he made in the weeks before the massacre, the removal of firearms, the manipulation of his children, the control of Tauscha, were all building toward one horrific moment. The facade of the perfect family, the ideal husband and father, was all part of a well-crafted performance that concealed the darkness festering beneath. As Michael became more fixated on the idea of losing his family, his actions grew more desperate. He knew that the divorce would mean the end of his control over Tauscha and the children, and this was something he could not accept. To him, the dissolution of the family wasn't just about losing his wife. It was about losing his dominance, his power. The man who had portrayed himself as a victim, the one who had presented himself as the loving provider, was no longer willing to let his life unravel. Tauscha, meanwhile, had no way of knowing that her decision to leave Michael would ultimately lead to such a horrific outcome. She had hoped that, by filing for divorce, she would find peace for herself and her children. Instead, she was walking into a nightmare that no one could have predicted. Despite her bravery, the manipulation and control Michael had exerted over her for years had left her vulnerable, and the consequences of her escape were far beyond anything she could have imagined. Michael's facade had finally begun to crack, and in its wake, the Haight family was left to pay the ultimate price. The truth, buried under layers of charm, manipulation, and control, would soon be exposed in the most tragic and irreversible way. No one in Enoch could have anticipated that the man they thought they knew would be capable of such unspeakable violence. And as the days passed, the quiet town would have to reckon with a reality that was far from what anyone could have expected. January 4th, 2023 began like any other cold winter morning in the quiet town of Enoch, Utah. The air was crisp and the snow had painted the streets in a soft white blanket. The Haight family's home sat in a quiet neighborhood tucked away from the busier areas of town. From the outside, there was nothing remarkable about it, but inside, a tragedy was unfolding, one that would shake this small community to its core. That morning, no one could have predicted the horror that lay behind the front door of the Haight household. Tauscha Haight had been absent from her scheduled appointment, prompting a concerned family member to call for a welfare check. The police, unsure of what they would find, arrived at the Haight residence to perform a routine check. What they discovered was beyond anyone's worst nightmare. The house, though still locked and eerily quiet, showed no immediate signs of disturbance. There was no commotion, no screams, just a heavy silence that spoke volumes. As the officers entered the home, they were hit with the undeniable stench of death. The discovery that followed would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Inside, in multiple rooms, lay the bodies of Michael Haight, his wife Tauscha, their 5 children, and Tauscha's 78-year-old mother, Gail Earl. Each of them had been fatally shot. Michael, who had been the head of the household, had turned the gun on his family before ultimately taking his own life. The tragedy was staggering, and the brutality of the act left the officers reeling in disbelief. How had things escalated to this point? What had driven Michael to commit such a horrific massacre? The crime scene itself was chilling in its methodical nature. The bodies were positioned with an eerie precision, suggesting that Michael had planned the murders well in advance. There was no sign of struggle or resistance, which left investigators with a haunting question. Had the victims known what was coming? Or was it an unexpected burst of violence that took them by surprise? The house, which should have been a place of warmth and comfort, had become the setting for a cold, calculated execution. The youngest victim, just 4 years old, was found in his bed, a victim of his father's unthinkable rage. The rest of the children, aged 7, 12, and 17, were also found in various rooms of the house, some with their bodies still in the positions they had been in when their lives were violently cut short. Tausha, too, had been murdered in the place she had called home for so many years. The grandmother, Gail Earle, was also a victim, caught in the crossfire of a twisted and horrific plan that spared no one, not even the most vulnerable. What shocked the investigators even more was the fact that Michael had carefully orchestrated every detail. Though Tausha had filed for divorce just 2 weeks before the killings, an act of courage that would ultimately seal her fate, Michael had been preparing for this moment long before. In fact, there were disturbing signs leading up to the massacre that now seem so clear in hindsight. Days before the tragedy, Tausha had confided in a family member that Michael had removed all the firearms from their home, seemingly in an attempt to prevent any violent outbursts. However, Michael had found a way around that, ensuring that he had access to a firearm when the time came. This chilling detail raised more questions than answers. How had he managed to keep this secret from Tausha? What kind of manipulation had been at play? Further investigation revealed even more unsettling details. In the days leading up to the murders, Michael had been scouring the internet for information about the sounds of gunshots, methods of carrying out murder, and details of other mass killings. These disturbing searches painted a clear picture. This was not an impulsive act. It was the culmination of months, if not years, of carefully plotting, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when that moment arrived, Michael Haight wasted no time. The police also found that Michael had left behind a suicide note, a final, chilling message that attempted to shift blame. In his note, Michael portrayed himself as a victim, blaming Tausha for the breakdown of their marriage and the emotional toll it had taken on him. He claimed that her decision to file for divorce had left him no other option but to take the lives of their children and her mother. The language in the note was disturbingly cold and self-centered, offering no remorse or understanding of the horrific nature of his actions. The investigation also revealed that Michael had been hiding behind a facade of normalcy. To the outside world, he was a quiet, reserved man who went about his daily life with few interactions. Neighbors described him as friendly but not particularly close. No one suspected that something so horrific could be brewing in his home. His wife, Tausha, had been the one to take on the role of caretaker and provider, often handling the children's needs while Michael stayed in the background. But as the layers of the case were peeled back, it became clear that Michael had been hiding a dark side, one that he had kept hidden for far too long. What Michael did to his family was both unthinkable and incomprehensible. How did a man who was entrusted with the lives of 5 children and a mother-in-law come to the point where he could annihilate everyone around him? Was it simply the breakdown of his marriage that pushed him over the edge, or was there something more disturbing at play? As authorities pieced together the events of that fateful day, the quiet town of Enoch was left in shock. Neighbors, family members, and even close friends were grappling with the harsh reality that the man they thought they knew could carry out such an act of violence. For them, this wasn't just a tragedy, it was a betrayal of trust, of safety, and of love. The true story of what happened in the Haight family home will never be fully understood. The questions surrounding Michael's motives, the extent of his manipulation, and the suffering his family endured remain unanswered. But one thing is certain: this tragedy will forever be etched in the minds of those who knew the Haights and in the hearts of all those who learned of it. It serves as a stark reminder of the darkness that can lie hidden behind even the most ordinary facades. And as the families of the victims begin to heal, the legacy of the Haight family massacre remains a haunting one, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous threats are the ones we least expect. The news of the Haight family massacre sent shockwaves through Enoch, a small town where nothing like this had ever been imagined. The tight-knit community, who had known Michael and Tausha for years, struggled to comprehend how such a tragedy could unfold right under their noses. Friends, neighbors, and even distant relatives were left grappling with the terrifying reality that someone they once trusted could commit such unspeakable acts. In the days that followed, the town was flooded with grief and disbelief. Vigils were held and memorials were organized to honor the victims: Tausha, Michael, their 5 children, and Tausha's mother, Gail. For many, the hardest part wasn't just the brutal loss, but the fact that they had missed the warning signs. Michael Haight had always been seen as a quiet, even reserved man. On the surface, he seemed to be the perfect family man, but in the aftermath, a different picture began to emerge. Neighbors recalled that Michael had been controlling, often isolating Tausha from her family and friends. Tausha had been open about the ongoing struggles in her marriage. Just weeks before her death, she'd taken the brave step of filing for divorce, seeking to escape the oppressive environment Michael had created. But no one could have known the lengths he would go to in order to maintain his control. In his suicide note, Michael's distorted view of the world became all too clear. He blamed Tausha for the collapse of their marriage and painted himself as the victim, an innocent man driven to the edge by a family he claimed had turned on him. That final letter, written in the days leading up to the massacre, revealed his warped justification for the murder. As the investigation unfolded, the chilling reality of Michael's actions began to sink in. His own children, his flesh and blood, had been among his victims. Neighbors who had seen him only as a loving father couldn't understand how someone they had trusted could kill his entire family. The psychological toll on the community was immense. Many struggled with the question, could this have been prevented? The media, too, played a significant role in shaping the narrative. In the aftermath of the tragedy, there were mixed reactions. Michael Haight's obituary, initially published by the family, praised him as a loving father and husband, a portrayal that sparked outrage. How could the man responsible for such horrific acts be remembered in such a way? The obituary was quickly retracted, but the damage was done. It was a stark reminder of how difficult it can be to reconcile the public image of someone with the reality of their actions. Despite the pain and confusion, the Haight family story prompted a renewed conversation about the dangers of domestic abuse and control within families. Experts pointed to the signs that were overlooked, the warning signs of a man slowly unraveling under the weight of his insecurities and his need for power. Tausha's decision to file for divorce had been a turning point, but it was also a dangerous one. Many domestic abuse survivors report an increased risk of violence when they attempt to leave an abuser, and sadly, Tausha's situation was no different. In the wake of the massacre, local counselors and support organizations rallied to provide resources for those affected by the tragedy, urging people to reach out and get help before it's too late. The haunting question remains, what could have been done to prevent this horror? While the answers will never be fully clear, one thing is certain. The Haight family's story serves as a devastating reminder of the dangers of unchecked power, isolation, and the silent struggles that often go unnoticed until it's too late. The horrific massacre of the Haight family left a community in mourning, but it also raised disturbing questions that continue to linger. Could anyone have seen the signs? Was there a way to prevent this tragedy? Michael Haight's chilling actions serve as a painful reminder of how deep domestic violence can run and the devastating consequences of unchecked control and manipulation. Tausha's decision to file for divorce was an act of courage, but in the end, it came at a devastating cost. As we reflect on this unimaginable loss, it's crucial to remember the importance of speaking out, supporting those in need, and addressing the often hidden realities of domestic abuse. If you or someone you know is facing similar struggles, please reach out to the proper resources for help. Let us know your thoughts about this case in the comments below. What do you think led to Michael Haight's violent actions? If you found this story unsettling and want to hear more, make sure to subscribe for more true crime stories like this one. And don't forget to like and share this video to raise awareness about the dark realities some families face behind closed doors.